Okay, this is kind of a video response to Gamester81s' 7th generation console discussion. I'm mostly going to be talking about old video games and the parallels between then and now. I'm of the belief that there's nothing new under the sun. The same discussion we're having today about, oh, there's nothing innovative about these games, there's nothing that amazing, there's nothing that's just blowing my mind. And that's true. We were having this same discussion 6 years ago about the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube and Dreamcast not being that big of an evolution over the 32-bit era. And that's true. It's not that big of a leap. But I think what people are remembering is the renaissance, the huge revolution and outburst of games from the leap between the 16 and 32-bit generations. And people remember that, and they expect that with each new console generation. And it's just not going to happen. It's unrealistic to expect that. The way I see it, there have been two really major renaissances in video games. And one of them was the leap from 2 to 3D. And the other one was the leap from arcade to home consoles. And you look at the early generations of video games, and I don't know which generation's which off the top of my head, so let's get that out of the way. You have the arcade generation that, you know, in the late 70s and early 80s, where you got your Pac-Mans, your Galagas, real simple pick up and play ADD type games where you put a quarter in, you have fun for 2 minutes, it's great, and you could either walk away from it there or sink some time into it. Yeah, and then you got the home consoles that try to bring home the arcade. And you got your Ataris, ColecoVisions, and Televisions. And they're all just ports of arcade games. You know, you're playing Popeye, you're playing Mario Brothers, and Donkey Kong at home. But it's still just the same gameplay on your TV. Then you have the video game crash, and the Nintendo rises out of those ashes, but it brings something new to the table. It starts out with a lot of the early Nintendo games are just, you know, arcade classics, but then you start getting console, home-style games. You get role-playing games, games with characters and plot, things that aren't just, you're a triangle, shoot at these asteroids and see how many points you can get. And it explodes. It's a revolution. It's a renaissance. There's new ideas, new gameplay mechanics. You have Legend of Zelda. That's mind-blowing. It's an action adventure game that you can save your progress and you collect items and solve puzzles. And you didn't really have that in the arcade. You didn't have something that you sink a couple weeks into and explore. And that generation was awesome because you also had maps. Games came with full color maps and were just a lot more involved. And then you move on to the 16-bit generation. And the same things you hear about today where everyone's shitting a brick over, oh my god, the graphics are so amazing. That happened. In 1989 when the Genesis came out, the same thing happened. Get on YouTube, look up videos from when the Genesis came out, and you'll see people going, oh man, the graphics are so realistic, and it's lifelike, and it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. It's way better than the Nintendo. It's, oh god, I gotta have this Genesis. It looks so lifelike. And those videos are hilarious to watch now, but likewise, in 30 years when you're jacking into the Matrix and whatever, they're gonna think these are baby toys, you know? Just like in Back to the Future, you have to use your hands. It's a baby toy. So, the same argument that people have today where, oh, it's the graphics, that's always been going on. So let's get that out of the way. That's always been going on. That's always going to go on. Some people appreciate the art style and the visuals and just like to look at pretty colors. And that's fine. If that's what people want to sink their cash into, it's amazing. It's good for them. But then that leap, though, people are just talking about the graphics. There's no substantial change. You look at the first Zelda, and you look at the Zelda on Super Nintendo, They're basically the same game. It's just been refined. The visuals have been increased, but it's still the same basic setup. You're a little fairy boy, you get a sword, you get items, you defeat dungeons. It's the same game, just refined. It's got more text now, it's got better graphics, but it's just not that big of a leap. Then you've got the leap from the next big renaissance. The next big leap in gaming is from 2D to 3D. You've got a whole new dimension. Simple things. A game could used to be as simple as you start at the left, you run to the right, punch every thug in your way, and that was an amazing game. Well, now you got 3D games. The beat 'em up, the side-scrolling beat 'em up genre has died. It's been hard to translate that into 3D. A few games have done well, like Yakuza. I love that game. And that's just a 3D beat 'em up where you run around in a 3D environment and beat the shit out of every thug that gets in your way. And just that leap from something like Final Fight to Yakuza is a pretty big leap, but only because of the third dimension. So there's that whole new renaissance where new video game ideas came out, new gameplay mechanics. Like the N64, people praise Ocarina of Time for its handling of 3D environments, which in part was just a genius way to work around the controller sucking. There wasn't two analog sticks. So to get around and have easy to pick up and play 3D combat, they invented auto-targeting. And that's all it is. It's just auto-targeting. The Z-lock, it's just auto-targeting. And it's a simple, genius way to get around the N64 controller not having two analog sticks. And you know, I mean, that's awesome that they figured that out and they did it in such an amazing way. But even then, that's the same Zelda game. You start out, you upgrade your swords, you get bombs, you get arrows, beat dungeons. It's the same game, but it's in 3D and you're moving in a 3D environment. Those were realistic, mind-blowing graphics at the time. They were amazing. So I've never seen anything so realistic and lush and lifelike, and it's like a real little town that you can run through, and it was amazing. But it was amazing just because it was no longer in 2 dimensions, it was in 3. It's amazing now. And I think that's why people love their old games, because there's such a clear line drawn in the sand. This is retro, this is modern. A lot of ideas that were started in 1995 with the release of the Sega Saturn, later the PlayStation, and even later the N64, a lot of those gameplay mechanics are still being refined. Just like things on the Super Nintendo were being refined from 6-7 years earlier on the Nintendo. And a lot of people, they think, oh, older games are so much better than the 7th generation, than the current generation games, because there's so many classics. Well, you're only thinking of the classics. Watch the Angry Nintendo Nerd. There are so many shitty games from the Super Nintendo, from the regular Nintendo, from the PlayStation. There are so many old shitty games, but you only think about the classics. This generation isn't done yet. We're just starting. We're in the first quarter to first half of this console generation, and there's already a couple classics out that will be fondly remembered by the kids growing up today, by your younger brothers, by your children. They're going to look back and think, oh, these are the classics. I grew up with this. And there's nothing new under the sun. The same discussion was happening in 1991 when the Super Nintendo came out. The same discussion was happening when the Sega Saturn and PS1s came out. And this generation's big claim to fame is online gaming. Now everything's networked. Everything's got to have an online mode. It's the death of the single-player campaign that's slowly but surely going away in favor of online gaming. And even that was introduced in... Hell, the 16-bit generation had a modem. Look up the X-Band modem. The Sega Saturn had an officially supported modem. It had a handful of online games. And they're still refining that today, and that's this generation's big claim to fame. Who knows what the next big renaissance will be? Will it be when we all have 3D TVs, and now you have 3D gaming, and there's some new amazing gameplay mechanic that developers come up with? I don't know yet. and it might take 10-15 years before we have that next big renaissance in gaming where there's new gameplay mechanics. But just like we're refining things from 1995's first 3D games, it's the same thing as when 1991 was just refining 1983's 2D games. So I don't know what the next big renaissance will be, neither do you, no one can guess. But that's my opinion on 7th generation games. There's plenty of amazing games from this generation, just like there's plenty of shovelware. There's plenty of shovelware on your Ataris, Nintendos, Super Nintendos, Genesis. There's good and bad games from every generation. There's good and bad ideas. And it's always just a constant evolution. So that's my opinion on current games and old games. So anyway, thanks for watching. Please rate, comment, and subscribe.